Have you ever walked out of a class or training and felt overwhelmed by how much information you have received, but you couldn't recall a single takeaway? That's the power of too much. Simplicity in teaching isn't about dumbing things down, it's about clarifying and focusing on the essential message. When we simplify, what we're doing is enabling learners to grasp concepts faster, deeper, and with more confidence. There are two things a great teacher will do. One, break down a situation or scenario so that a 10-year-old is able to grasp the major points. And two, able to put enough context behind what is being said, enough meat on the bone. Simplicity is very important in learning. In fact, cognitive psychology has shown that when too much information is presented at once, learners struggle to retain it. So, as an educator, I have valued the power of simplicity in teaching. Because when you walk out of that classroom, you need to have an anchor that is easy, plug and play, something from your everyday life that will remind you about what you learned. There's such a thing called cognitive load theory. And the cognitive load theory is all about reducing the cognitive load. What does that? It's simplicity. Simplicity reduces cognitive load, which refers to the amount of information our working memory can handle. A very simple quote says, "The brain is not designed to remember everything. The more we overload, the less we understand," said John Sweller. Schwartz says the paradox of choice. This shows that offering too many choices or too much information can lead to decision paralysis. And that's why good educators break things down into smaller, more manageable chunks. In teaching, presenting too many complex ideas can leave learners stuck or confused. So my challenge to educators is how can you make it as simple as possible? Da Vinci says simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. The great Steve Jobs understood that, and that's why when he designed with the great people at Apple, the iPhone and the iPad, he wanted them to not have buttons. That made the interface easy, friendlier. You could even say intuitive. Let me give you some strategies for simplifying content. You got to break the information down into bite-sized chunks, bite-sized pieces of information that are easy to digest. Avoid bombarding learners with too much at once. I used to make that mistake as a trainer, wanting to teach everything in a day, but it's not possible to absorb everything. Instead of explaining 5 different theories at a go, why don't you introduce one concept at a time, ensuring full comprehension? It will take more time. It's like writing to memory does take time, but also writing to heart takes time too. You don't just want to write to memory, you want to write to heart, and that will make it muscle memory. Use simple language, avoid jargon and overly technical terms unless it's absolutely necessary, and then break down complex terms with easy analogies or everyday examples. I like using everyday speak. Speak that the students understand, because when you break it down into easy language, people absorb it better. Also, talking about language and simple language, body language goes a long way as well. Use body language to emphasize at the right time. Use delays in your delivery. And also, dress code could be a language. A student once said, Phil, you're making me feel like I'm in a straitjacket, like hot, because being tied up and dressed to the nine doesn't work in every scenario. So in a lot of my trainings, I like going very simple, just a simple t-shirt with a company logo, or I dress down as though I'm in a relaxed environment. So you might see me wear a lot of friendly earth colors, paisley designs. It's for a reason. It's intentional because I want to break down the complexity and make it as simple as possible. When explaining a difficult term, for example, cognitive dissonance, break it down by saying, for example, it's that uncomfortable feeling when our actions don't match our beliefs. Like saying you're committed to fitness, but hitting the snooze button every morning. So that gives a good illustration of what you are explaining to the students. Focus on one key takeaway. Ask yourself, if my learners remember one thing, what should it be? Everything you teach should reinforce that concept. So, my advice to teachers, trainers, educators, keep it simple. The von Restorff effect, 1933. The principle states that when multiple pieces of information are presented, the simplest, most unique, or isolated one is the most memorable. When teaching, simplicity makes information stand out. Going back to the effects that I've just described, the most unique, the most isolated one is memorable. So, an outrageous example or metaphor, an outrageous mnemonic, those will stand out. And people will always remember the main story around what you're trying to teach. And they use that as anchor points to help them. Miller's Law, George Miller did research to show that people can only hold about 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information in their working memory at once. Speaking of the average individual, not talking about superhuman people like Jim Quick, the brain guru. But the average person can hold 7 plus or minus 2, and there are ways we can scale that up with training and intentionality. But for the average person, we need to simplify. Simplifying content ensures that you stay within this range. The quote from George Miller is the magical number 7 plus or minus 2, some limits on our capacity for processing information. I also want you as an educator to give your people leverage, metaphors, provide visuals that learners can see in their heads. A metaphor such as teaching is like building a house. Start with a foundation, right? It makes abstract concepts more concrete, no pun intended. When you're able to give people a familiar visual, a familiar metaphor, it goes a long way. I could say, for example, teamwork is like a relay race. Success depends on passing the baton smoothly. If one runner fumbles, the whole team falls behind. You immediately get the message. Teamwork, team sport is not a one-man show. Also, I would recommend using visuals with few elements that focus on the key point. Overly complex slides or diagrams, they can overwhelm learners, and sometimes we're guilty of showing too many slides, too much information. When teaching about process flow, you might want to use a simple diagram with only the essential steps. One of my favorite diagrams I created takes 50 different concepts and whittles them down into a handful. two handfuls at most. And I employ the 80-20 principle or the 80-20 rule. So to get an 80% return on your students' understanding, you got to focus on the right 20% of stuff, the right 20% of the variables. A real-world example of simplicity can be referenced from Steve Jobs' approach to Apple products. Steve Jobs emphasized simplicity in design and function. One of the things he liked to do was to eliminate unnecessary features to focus on what mattered most. And this philosophy revolutionized technology and made it accessible to millions. Steve Jobs says, focus and simplicity. That's been one of my mantras. Simple can be harder than complex. Think about that. That's why I say a great trainer, a great teacher does the difficult work of keeping it simple. It's hard work. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean, free from clutter, to make it simple. But it's worth it in the end because once you get there, you can move mountains, said Steve Jobs. So think about the power of simplicity. You, as a teacher, take a complex subject and simplify it to its bare essentials. Can you do that? It's a great exercise. The most complex thing you've ever taught. Can you take it and explain it in 60 seconds or less? That is a great exercise for every teacher to try. Anyone who is getting into the world of teaching. My recommendation to you is to constantly challenge yourself to make it simpler and simpler. So you go ahead and try it. Simplify a complex topic into its essentials and give it to me in 60 seconds. You will observe from this exercise that teaching it will also become easier when you've gone through this step. The problem is a lot of educators don't go through the mental step of making it simple. They know a lot, but they can't impart a lot because they're doing a lot. In conclusion, my friends, simplicity is key to understanding. Keep your lessons focused and clear. In every lesson, ask, what can I strip away to leave only what matters? The more you ask yourself that question, the better you're going to get. All right, my friends. Well, thank you very much for joining me. I hope this has been insightful to you. Remember, I offer training, coaching, and mentoring for those who want to perhaps teach better, the tricks of the trade, things that I have used in the classroom when training the likes of NASA and the FBI and the US Army, all to great results. If you want to know more about that and you want training, coaching, and mentoring, go on down to the website. It's pmanonymous.com. pmanonymous.com, right here on the screen. Let me show it to you. And there you have it, my friends. I hope this gives you some insight and some help. If you're new to teaching, you want to learn more, this might be an opportunity. You take care and all the very best in your teaching. Bye for now.